All right, y'all. So I wanted to talk about the difference between Meris pedals and Strymon pedals. Not to like diss on Strymon pedals or anything. I've been using it for like 10 years and it rules. Still love it. Still have some of them. But when new pedals started coming out, I always asked myself the question of quality. You know, like, is new stuff going to actually literally crank out something that sounds higher quality and all of that? But then the new Big Sky came out and I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just get that again because that's been working for me, right? But then I think me, like a lot of other folks, saw it and it just didn't quite scratch the itch of like doing some new stuff that felt enticing enough to spend big bucks to get it again. And there's definitely some cool stuff. I don't want to poop on them because they're great, but I just couldn't stop myself from being super curious about Meris pedals and they're like Mercury X, LVX, and all that. And so when the Big Sky MX came out and I was like, well, I have to do it. I'm going to do it. I saw some of the things that it had and I wasn't super stoked. I was like, well, let me like really look at the Meris pedals then and see what I think about that. There was a handful of key things that stood out to me that I was like, okay, yes, I think that is what I want in a different new pedal. Not just because of new flashy things, but just literally like what's going to empower some creativity here. And so just to like quickly break it down now, without dragging on this intro section about these thoughts too much, the big thing was, here's my like best example. You have the Big Sky, and let's just say it has like the like choral setting, whatever it's called. And that's like a whole algorithm, which is cool. Sounds cool. On the Meris pedal, the Mercury X, comparatively, it has like 8 core reverb algorithms, and then it has like 14 different modulation or like dynamic effects, stuff like that. And one of them is like the choir setting, or one is like a compressor, chorus modulation, or vibrato, or tape, tremolo, and I mean, the list just kind of goes on and on. And so that was something that immediately caught my eye, was like, okay, cool. So they didn't say, hey, this is your like one stuck algorithm. They were like, hey, here's all the algorithms, and then here's like the 15 million different ways you can affect it, basically. And so I'll jump into some of that and kind of show just quickly some of my curiosities and examples of this thing that I'm referring to and why I think it kind of separates them a bit. But it's cool to know that Terry and all the folks at Meris really spent a lot of time with these pedals, so much so that he said it almost broke them as a company. Not like gone broke, but I mean, maybe, but mostly just that like probably like their spirit was almost broken because it was so difficult to crank this much stuff into one pedal. The way that I feel like I could liken it is it's almost as if both the Mercury and the LVX separately are like a DAW, where you say like, here's my effect and here's my dry guitar, and I want to affect it with these 3 different things, and then you can literally choose like the routing for it and stuff. I don't want to scare you away. It's a lot. It almost scared me away, but it can be very simple. And I also have presets if you're too afraid to dive into that and you just want something that feels and sounds awesome. So anyways, that was my primary reason for considering Meris, and I just wanted to dabble and start with the Mercury first and see if I liked it. I did. The biggest noticeable thing to me was the like width size, and that's when I found out allegedly that the Strymons are panned only technically like 75%, which is interesting. Now, I want to take a moment to stop seemingly pooping on the Strymons. They rule. And I think all the little niche things about them, like the 75% panning or different things with EQ or whatever it's doing, is literally part of its charm. That sounds really cool. But I just think that while that's really cool and it's a fixed sound, the moment I got my hands on the Meris stuff, I immediately kind of felt a sense of like freedom and flexibility. I was like, oh, I'm really not stuck to a certain sound. I also didn't realize how much, especially when I compare old clips of me using Strymons versus using Meris stuff, how easily Meris stuff sits in a mix, and how much the Strymon stuff, it just sounds a certain way. It's really cool, but it definitely sits on top of your guitar more, I think, probably due to that panning thing. Maybe. So either way, overall, I think the Meris stuff is very simple to sound good. It's easy to sound good in a mix, which is really important. You're not fighting stuff. You're not trying to get it out of the way. I would say those are some of the key takeaways that I could like verbally tell you about here in the beginning without just showing you that it was like, this was some of the stuff I looked into that made me say, wow, this is potentially worth it, or things that would make it obviously stand out above a different choice. So it's not to say that, one is just simply better than the other, because I still love my Strymons for different reasons, but it's just worth noting. Now, I don't want to say that the Meris pedals don't come with their series of difficulties, kind of like I was talking about. They are intense to a degree, like they're very complex. The Strymons are very easy to sound good without a lot of tinkering, which is so cool. But they do hold your hand. It's like riding a bike with training wheels, versus these are like riding your bike without your training wheels. and you can do so much more with them. But if you don't want to jump into them super deep or know how to jump into them super deep, that it can be difficult and you're going to fall off your bike. And so once again, just kind of bringing it back around to, if you're like afraid to jump into these or you don't have time to, but you want what it has to offer in terms of quality, I'm offering some presets. They're available. You can just reach out to me on Instagram. I can just talk with you directly, or they'll be on Tone Factor as well, and you can grab them there. And there'll be a link down below. So I think without further ado, we should probably just jump into it and listen to them. I just want to showcase and touch on a few things that I think are just so fascinating about the pedals. Most of it correlates and jumps over, you know, from one pedal to the other because they both have a majority of the same things, but there's definitely some differences. Like this one has this modulated effect and this one doesn't. And so, you know, we'll see what that is. All right, so here we go. We've got the Mercury X here first, and then we'll jump over to the LVX. We'll still use the LVX from time to time, but we'll start with one pedal at a time just to keep things focused and so you can see the pedal a little better than trying to split it between both in one shot. As far as what I'm using, I've got my Veritas Portlander, and it's got Lindy Fralin Modern PAFs in it, and I'm using a JMI amp on the left side and a White Lightning, a Fender Hot Rod Deluxe White Lightning on the right side. They sound awesome. This is what they sound like all together. I also have my overdriver set a little cleaner. I'm currently missing my first gain stage drive for reasons I will explain at a later date. It is going to return. I just don't have it right this second. So the overdriver is acting as my first gain stage, kind of along with the constant, which I'll probably use a little bit, which that one's cool. Probably talk about that more later. Anyways, so what we've got here, let me just kind of start with, I'll start with this very basic preset I've got called Cloud Pitch here. This is what it sounds like. First of all, let's just, you know, give it a listen. I still have the overdriver on. Very cool. You kind of hear the subtle, like, warbly thing going on from the modulation. Love that. Called it Cloud because I believe I'm using Prism here. And obviously we can verify in a second, but I called a lot of my presets Cloud because Prism is giving me the closest to the Cloud thing because of the nature of the diffusion that it has. You know, like, for those who had a Big Sky or have a Big Sky, how Cloud, you know, has that diffusion knob, and whenever you open it up more, it does that dotty thing. If you go to the right, it's just more like together and smoky sounding. The Prism is the closest one I've experienced out of all the algorithms that do that sort of thing. It definitely just responds very different as a reverb. As a whole, I'm just using the word Cloud to just kind of like help me liken it to something mentally. One thing I actually want to highlight here, it may sound a little silly, but just starting right off the bat, one thing I love is the way that you save presets on here. So let's just go ahead and make sure I haven't changed anything. And you click and hold this button, and then you can kind of cycle through the different options here, basically just being name and the number it's on. So if you want to change the preset that it's saved to, you just cycle it that way. But I just love the way that the naming works in this. So, you know, this one cycles between which box you're in. This one cycles between, you know, which letter you're on there. And then this one cycles the actual letter itself. Well, it's a cool little set of functions where, so basically if you click in this one, it just deletes the letter that it's on. And then if you click this, it's going to add another letter. Have to be careful about the next letter I add there, first of all. So let's add another one, and then we'll jump it over. And then what's really cool too is if you press this one, it cycles through all the major different categories of letter. I don't know why I love that. Jump past that second letter there. Nice and fluid. And then we're going to go to pitch. Anyways, I just love the simplicity of the navigation and how there's like the kind of like quick, like hotkeys to get you certain different things. So that's fun. Anyways, saving is fun and easy on this. That's cool. Obviously, you have your basic commands. You have decay. You have in this case, for this particular reverb. Oh, because I was wrong. Actually, this particular reverb is gravity. This is probably one of the few that's gravity and not Prism, because I liked using Prism a lot. But it has tilt EQ in the bottom left where it starts at 0%, and the higher up you go, the brighter it gets. The lower you go, it gets darker, for instance. Very dark. Super cool, super ghostly sounding. Anyways, it has mod feedback, it has mod depth, and all the classic stuff you'd expect a reverb pedal to have. You know, this is all the ordinary things that you see, almost most of them just on the front face of the pedal too. But that's not what I wanted to highlight here. That's the common stuff that most folks are going to look at this and say, cool, that's what I'm getting. That's what I'm going to use this for. But I want to start actually at something like the dynamics here, which this one is clearly using. It has a compressor on it. That's wild if you really think about it. If you go into the dynamics here and you actually just turn the wheel, you've got like compressor link, which the link in comparison to just regular compressor apparently has something to do with dynamically shifting the way it's compressing the stereo field, you know, depending on the stereo signal it's receiving, something like that. I don't know. Then you have swell, you have diffusion, limiter, you know, which is kind of similar to compression, but different, you know, it's running into a hard ceiling, freeze, a couple of just like really interesting dynamic options. But let's just stop at compressor here for a second. So it just snapped it back to some generic settings, not necessarily what I had it on, but you can control the ratio, the gain, which the gain is specifically going to gain anything that the compressor is affecting. And I say that because you can choose its location. So you've got like, you know, pre-dry now. So that means it's actually compressing the dry guitar signal as well. Here's an example. So now if I take that off of pre-dry and I just go to something like pre, now it's just, it's compressing before the reverb tail, but not on the guitar. And we'll experience it more dramatically if I gain it up even more and then say, and I'll mess with the threshold in a second. So now that means that, so it's compressing the reverb, but it's gaining it up a lot. We didn't change how much it's compressing. We're just adding extra gain to the reverb. Also, I guess, come to think of it, I didn't even pay attention to my ratio. So 6:1 is a pretty aggressive compression. I would usually prefer to have it anywhere from maybe 4:1 or 2:1. Just means whenever you're inputting your guitar into this compressor, how much is it going to push the thing you're compressing and, well, compress it. So with that ratio lower, we should actually experience more reverb and it won't compress it as much. Yeah, so that's definitely a lot more present. Let's go ahead now and just compress it more. Let's lower the threshold. Raise the mix a little bit. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. It has this way of being present, but it's like not sitting on my guitar. So I'm going to turn on a delay now, just my general dotted from the LVX, and just see how that kind of pairs together. Let's gain it up a little bit. Cool, let's not compress it as much now. Let's raise that threshold a bit. So now it's really present, but it's going to still compress it, but maybe just not as much so that when I'm really driving that rhythm there, it's not going to just completely eliminate the reverb like it is, which, I mean, maybe that's an effect that you want to accomplish. So you can have in your cleaner gain stages this swimmy reverb, but whenever you then turn on more gain and you go for like big rhythm or something, it actually compresses the reverb out of the way. So that could be helpful. I mean, and the way it even trickles out is kind of sweet. It almost like hard cuts. It's got its like nice ambient effect, and then it's gone fairly quickly. It's a cool reverb. But normally if you're compressing the reverb tail a lot, especially if it has a longer feedback tail or decay, that compression will actually enhance how obvious or how apparent that decay is by squeezing that signal tighter. So there's so many ways that you can use a compressor on your reverb to accomplish different results from the same reverb. So that's the first thing that I wanted to highlight is, you're taking one algorithm and then you're just adding different things, so many different options to affect it. Let's actually jump ahead now. Let's return it back to what it was. And so now we've got like something like a preamp, which, what that means is like essentially different kind of like drive textures. We have volume pedal, we have tube. So that's like, a tube saturation, we have transistor, we have op amp, and then on different ones we'll sometimes have bit crush, so that can be cool. But I guess different algorithms are going to offer seemingly some different things. Let's just hear something like tube now. Super interesting. There's no EQ on it. It's just the way that it's like the character that the tube preamp has is adding this like high mid sort of like hiss, and we mostly just have the location that it's in, we have the gain, and we have the level. So let's add maybe a little less gain or something. All right, now that we've done that, let's raise the level a little bit so it's more apparent. Honestly, starting to love it. Love the character it's adding. Let's throw a little delay in there too. I'm going to raise the mix up a little bit and see what kind of character that has. So honestly, I love that a lot. It's so ghostly, and with the tube preamp adding that sort of like, stripping lows a little bit, and it's adding this really interesting high mid hiss. I'm going to save this. This is really cool. So I'm just going to keep it the same name. Another great opportunity to see how you can save something. And I love throwing stuff way back here because I don't know if I have interesting goodies before. So I'm just going to save it at like 24 or something. And we're going to jump all the way back. Cool. So that was tube. Let's check one more just to drive the point home here. But to me, that is like the power of how just easy it is to find some inspiring sounds by adding such interesting, bizarre modifiers. Like we threw a tube saturation onto a reverb and not on top of the guitar. And the way that interacted with all the other stuff I built on that particular reverb sounded so magic, man. It was just the right EQ. And how could I have possibly gotten that EQ any other way than adding just a tube saturation to a reverb? How cool. So here's op amp. A little more hissy in a different EQ location that I'm not as fond of, but let's just mess around here. Turn the gain up a hair, turn the level up a hair. Ultimately not bad. It's a cool sound. I think I prefer the other one more. It's a little more gentle in its top end, but it's still cool. What a vibe. So let's go ahead and go off of this. Just another great example of being able to add just cool stuff. We have filter, which filter is just going to be different forms of EQ. I have used this in a few different ways. Let's see, I did parametric, and you've got options like a high pass, a low pass, a band pass. And so the high pass and low pass are just going to do exactly that. They're going to high and low pass if that's what you choose. The band pass is going to be more of just like you select your frequency and you can just gain it up or gain it down. So you could add a frequency range. You could cut one. I mean, we're here. Let's just go ahead and do it. Let's do it in post. We have that on. Let's see, we're right now hovering around 1200 and it's gaining it up. Man, and you know what I'm thinking of? That, like, right this second, that would be crazy. It would be such a good show and tell as well, is you can control a hold modifier. So what that means is, and this is great, this is the filter, this is how you EQ stuff, but this is just what came to mind because all the frequency ranges kind of sounded cool in a weird way, depending on what you're playing. But let's jump over for a sec. We're going to jump past all these modifiers. We're going to go to expression pedal, and we're going to set the source to hold, and minimum is 0, maximum is 100. Now we have to assign what it is, and we're going to assign it to the filter frequency. What should happen now is I'm going to click this, and while I'm holding it, it should sweep the frequency, I think. Dude, what a bizarre application, but that came to mind as I was just turning there. I was like, man, it'd be sweet if I could just push a button that sweeps the frequency for me instead. And it does. Wow, how cool is that? And you can, instead of making it 0 to 100%, you could make it like a little bit less so that it stops at maybe a certain frequency that you like more. I mean, why not just show you? All right, 60%. Let's see where that stops. Cool, kind of in like a weird mid-range sort of bump, and it just howled a little bit. It didn't get too hissy or anything, but I mean, how sweet is that? So you go over to expression pedal. This is a great moment to show you kind of how that works. I mean, it basically is as I just showed you. So you can choose your expression A source, and that can be an actual expression pedal. That can be the hold button. It can be an LFO filter sweep. So you can have an LFO, which means it's just going to keep sweeping on its own, and then you can tell it like, okay, what is that LFO going to do? And here you can choose its like specific way that it LFOs, which a lot of that is over my head, but it's good to know that it's there and you can do things like that. Then we have things like pitch as well. I often used, I feel like in a lot of mine, a bit of a micro shift adjustment, which means, you know, let's just throw it on my dry guitar here and turn off my delay. So you can hear it bending the sense of my guitar. And so basically I wound up throwing that on the reverb, and it's doing this cool little thing where it bends the reverb sense. And in subtle application, it adds a really interesting modulation, and that's actually just pitch. So we spared the modulation panel over here, and there's different, more aggressive pitches, you know, literally from octave shoots, you know, up or down, or different other random organy sounding things. But you've got something like the hazy modulation. So instead of having to use a chorus, if you want that thing, you can do the sense bend with pitch, and then you can just go over to here and use a different kind of wild modulation. We got the vocal mod, which is kind of what I was referring to earlier, where on the Big Sky, God bless it, it's a fixed algorithm on that pedal, and this one is not. It's just one modifier on any of your 8 different reverbs and what you can do there. Let me just kind of show you. I'll jump over to one of my presets I've got here that is exactly that. It is a vocal kind of reverbed out called Vocal Wash, and this is what it sounds like. Very cool sounding. And so, it can be far more exaggerated than what we heard there when we just jumped in here for a second. But man, one of the cool ones, I mean, you've got your traditional choruses and you can throw it on your dry guitar. You can do a vibrato, throw it on your dry guitar, or just have it be on your reverb effect. Let's turn the depth to maximum just to exaggerate it. Oh, also, let's get it out of feedback loop, because feedback loop, this is a good time to explain it. I had to have a buddy named Jimmy Riggs on Instagram explain to me the feedback loop, because I just didn't get it. I totally understand the way that all the other locations work, but feedback loop, I just couldn't grasp. And so basically the way it was explained to me is when you have either the decay on the reverb or the feedback on the delay, the longer the tail is, the more it's feeding back into itself essentially. And so if you have one of these modified effects in the feedback loop, it is continually driving that feedback, that decay into the feedback loop, which that effect is in, and it will continue to exaggerate the modifier. So if that's a drive or modulation, it's going to continue to compound and warble and drive it more depending on what you have in there. Anyways, that's not where we want this right now. We're going to throw it in post so that it is after the reverb effect. And that is way more obvious. Going to drop that down a lot so that it sounds less like a carnival. Kind of sick. If you use it in subtle amounts, I'm sure it could be pretty sweet. Super cool. I mean, it's just, it adds an interesting movement if you do it subtly like that, and I love it. I'm here for it. So in short, that's modulations. There is one last honorable mention. I mean, there's tremolo. I mean, let's hear that. Super cool. It's a tremolo on a reverb. And then you have hazy. This one's cool. It's a sort of tape age kind of thing going on. Really gnarly sounding, but if you return all the low end to it and you return all the high end to it, so it's not affecting your original tone, and then you drop the age so it's not doing super gnarly stuff, and you drop decimate so it's not doing super gnarly stuff, which they're still cool. Don't want to say they're not. In subtle doses, though. Gnarly. So we have accomplished something very bizarre, and the location we threw it in is interacting with something in a really bizarre way. So it was set to feedback loop and was sounding pretty good there. Yeah, that's cool. That warble is really sweet. Let's exaggerate it now. Turn up age. And now, since it is in the feedback loop, the more it decays, the more exaggerated it gets, because it's feeding back into itself, exaggerating the effect. How cool is that? So you have a sort of tapey modulation for the reverbs. Anyways, that is, I would say, most of the interesting things, like without diving into every single effect, because the goal here for me is not to, this isn't an in-depth rundown of the Mercury X. This is a, Kenyon's highlight reel of things that are super cool about the Meris pedals. And to me, it is that it has really good sounding core algorithms, and then it has so many ways you can modify it and put those things in different routed orders so that they interact with each other in a different and interesting way. That sounds just so cool. All right, so next we have the LVX here. One thing that is really cool, and let's just go to some random, just scroll on to something. I have so many different ones here. But so let's pick this random one here, and just want to firstly talk about the structure and the type. So type-wise, we have digital, which is like, digital delay. We have BBD for bucket brigade, and then we have magnetic. And here in a moment, I'll actually show what that sounds like. But you have your subdivision here, which is really cool because you can actually change your left and right side. So if you have, let's just go over to standard delay for a second. Standard is cool. It's a very common sounding delay, and it is quite mono, if I may say so myself, if you don't do anything to it, and you just have the subdivision on left and right doing the same thing. And there's nothing wrong with that if that's what you want. But step number one, something you can do is just literally change your subdivision. So we have dotted eighth on the left and eighth on the right. what a cool sound. What an easy way for it to sound so wide in stereo. I found some different ways, so first and foremost, and there is, you can just add chorus to something and that can add some width. I had to really dive into, I will say, some of the tricky things about this pedal is modulation alone. Let's actually just back out and hear that here. So if I just turn up modulation by itself, it's not the same modulation as like the Timeline has. You hear it has kind of a heavy speed to it, so let's drop it and see what qualities we notice. Honestly, that's really nice. That's really cool sounding. So it can sound good, but let's just curiously, if we set this back to the same subdivision on each side, how much, stereo width are we necessarily getting from just the modulation alone? It's not bad. It's just not, it feels like you have to sacrifice so much width or so much like warble and depth just to get that width. And that's not necessarily what I'm after, but I will say it sounded really cool whenever you just separated the subdivision on left and right side. So that's really cool to know. But I found my own slew of tricks for how I made things sound really wide on my delay here. I had to spend a lot of time digging to find some other meaningful ways to get width without it sounding, just chorusy, like super chorusy, or, any other number of things, which leads me to my next comment though, the different structures. Multi-tap is really cool. It's really bizarre. You have 8 different tap like heads essentially, where each one is doing something different. You can choose these normal settings there. You can choose its panning, you can choose its volume, and you can choose its timing offset. And that's really important because when something's timed, similarly, it will sound on top of itself. And whenever you separate that timing, kind of like we saw in the changing subdivision on the left and right side, it made things sound wide. So there's a little hint there for you. But this one's really cool. I'm just using 2 of the 10 taps to get my really cool sounding delay, which sounds like this. Very nice, very simple. But if we go over to here, and let's just choose like number 6, we turn its level up. And let's just say, so panning right now, let's go all the way to the left, and its timing offset is like a weird 61%. What does that sound like? Gives it like a weird gallop. Let's pan that over to the right now. All right, let's pan it like halfway. You can kind of hear that delay sitting there in the center. So now let's do something where let's just do a normal panning all the way to the right, but let's drop that timing offset to like 46%. So we're already starting to get into a territory of a really cool reactive pattern of a delay just by adding one more tap into what is just 2, a left and right, and choosing their properties individually. Really cool. You can literally add 10 of them. That's wild. Next, after that, let's back up. We have multi-filter, which is doing the same thing, but it's just allowing you to have a finite control over the filter frequency of that particular tap and, different things like that, panning, all the same. It's wild. After that, we have Poly, which I love because I came from a Polymoon, and I absolutely love that pedal. Nothing sounded like it. Nothing had its weird quirky things that it does. So that's just that's 3 taps. Let's reduce it to 2, and that's going to give us that classic Polymoon ping pong. Already magical sounding. If we turn off its sort of modulated effect there, you can go over and then do this weird octave up and down stuff. somebody asks, man, why would I ever use that? And then you go and drench your reverb to maximum and show them what you would use it for. That's why you would use that. Anyways, so it just has so many other cool, meaningful things, like if you just do like slow and shallow, you just get really weird, really cool effects. And then you can add more taps to it. You can add dimension to it, which on the Polymoon, that was basically diffusing the reverb taps and turning them into more of a reverb. So just super cool that all of that is in here. I love that stuff. And then after that, we have what else? We have Reverse Classic. Awesome. And then we have Series, which, if I'm not mistaken, Series is something along the lines of one side feeds into another, I think. Something like that. There is some uncharted territory over here, friends, and that is fun to me. We've got some goodies. And at the moment of this recording, it does have the Predator editor from Meris. You can plug it in and actually navigate your presets and actually change your presets and modify everything. That is coming for the Mercury. It's not here yet at the moment of this recording, but will be soon. And so yeah, that's all the structures there. Now, if we were to jump back over, that's the cool basis of this pedal. Those are the core algorithms of this pedal. And that is, once again, not necessarily even touching on the fact that there is core elements of the pedal, but then you can affect them, you can modulate them, you can add the tremolo, which on here is called ring mod. So let's jump over to some of this stuff I'm referring to. So we have dynamics. I do have a compressor on this, and that's helping. For me, what I found with the LVX was I just, with it, the delay by itself, it wasn't getting quite enough mix at 50%. And so I wanted to gain it up using the compressor. That gave me what I wanted. And then I just kind of finessed the compressor after that to give me other reactions and how I want it to act for me. Let's mess with the preamp here. Let's put on a tube, because that sounded really cool over here on the reverb, and see what that sounds like. It's in the feedback loop at the moment, so that'll be interesting. So let's turn that over to post instead. It's much more immediate and aggressive in post, so that's really cool to hear, actually. Such a difference there. Let's go pre. In all honesty, I think I'm liking the feedback loop the most. It was the most gentle, and the way that it continued to compound into itself was like what I want. Oh yeah, feedback loop is going to be the ticket for me moving forward, man. That sounds cool. Let's see what a little less sounds like. You definitely have to finesse the level a little bit, because it's pretty sensitive to level change when you change the gain like that. Very cool, very responsive. Let's turn on a reverb and mess with that for a sec. Oh, brother, that feels good. Okay, let's actually take modulation for a second. I don't remember where I have it. And just see what a little modulation on top of that grit sounds like. I think in this scenario, just turning up the modulation knob was not what I was after. I would rather go into, you know, the settings, go find modulation. Well, look at that. Well, here we are. Let's go ahead and do it. And then let's find chorus there, and then let's throw it. So let's throw it in post. Maybe that'll have a good reaction. Let's drop the depth a little bit. Let's go back and turn the level up a little bit. I feel like we still lost a little level. Turn the gain down a smidge. You know, messing with this, one thing that I noticed that I love, on the timeline, if I wanted that much mix out of my delay, I would have to sacrifice by eliminating my clean tone. And as you saw me cycle off and on for just a moment, because I wanted to see, like, is my clean tone any less? Because this delay feels huge. But I don't think my guitar is losing any signal, and we turn it on and off, and it's not, because every location where we have turned up the delay to make it more reactive has been in different locations other than the actual mix knob, which I believe is just set to 50-50 for, you know, maximum both sides. And so because of that, we have this very present delay, but my guitar is not losing any size. I don't know if that's going to be what I want, you know, if I like really drive my guitar, but who knows? Let's see what it sounds like. So cool. And I assume that since I have that compressor on, that it is ducking a good bit, I could probably loosen up that threshold a bit if I wanted that delay to be even more reactive. So that's what I've done here. Let's see what it sounds like. It's just so wild. I haven't really played a delay that's so reactive and so loud, but not ducking my signal. It's bizarre, and it feels cool. It feels so alive, and it's like wrapping around my ears in stereo. I love it. While that delay is such a vibe, I don't think I'm gonna save it because it's a little top end heavy, and I kind of like its reactivity, but it's a little top end heavy. So I think I would rather have one that is just a little more intentionally catered in the, like, yeah, top end, a little warmer maybe, so it's not so explosive in the high mids and stuff. But either way, you get the idea. I mean, that's just so cool. We messed around with both preamp and modulation and added some chorus there. But, you know, if we're to continue to move on in terms of just showing some of the effects, you know, obviously we have chorus, we have flanger. which is interesting and weird. And I'm sure you could kind of find a cool set of options for that. Here's dynamic flanger. And I'll go ahead and jump back over because I forgot we made those modifications to the compressor to open up the delay a lot. And it's cool, but it's a lot. But anyways, that's what that is. We have cassette. Cassette's really cool. I actually have a preset using this, and it's affecting the dry guitar as well. Let's go ahead and do that just because, you can really hear what it's doing. Cool modulation, and it's literally sitting in a delay pedal. I'm here for it. That's so cool. Okay, so ring mod, that's what I was saying, is like the tremolo. Barber pole, chorus. So that's just kind of like a quick look at some modulation options. After that, we have modifiers. We have like the looper set of modifier options, which we explained some of the LFO stuff. You can have something just kind of constantly moving, altering an effect, which could be crazy in a really cool way. You have expression pedal options, which, if you have an expression pedal that works that way, or you can set the hold modifier just like I have, and I made a whammy effect. Discovered something so cool. I have this big old reverb from the Specular Tempest. It sounds like this. It's really dreamy. And so if I take this and that reverb's going into it, check it out. So, I probably wouldn't be playing like inverted chords and then doing it where it sounds like a horror film screaming, but you get the idea. It bends the reverb, which that's crazy. Anyway, so that's a quick look at that. And you can set up any of these things to be the hold modifier. And when you hold it, it's this percentage to this percentage, and it's going to change this thing, like the frequency range of the EQ or something, which I don't know if I mentioned it, but there's very much, filter control, which is EQ, and you can control, band pass, low pass, high pass, stuff like that, which honorable mention, and it kind of frustrated me at first. There is a top end, roll off called dampening here. So that's, the higher the percentage, the more it's rolling off your top end. There wasn't one for low end. I was a little disappointed in that, but you can accomplish that in a multitude of other ways, whether that be the filter or whether that be a modulation that gives you low end control. There's a multitude technically of other ways. I just wish there was one that was like separate over here that's just like low end roll off or something. But either way, that is the LVX in its simplest form, and some of the effects that I've dialed, there's so many things that it can do. There's so many things the Mercury X can do, and together, man, are they a force to be reckoned with. They're so inspiring, and in a mix, they sit so well, so easily. I'm finding that I'm kind of fighting less and worrying less about effects because they by themselves just sound good. And man, is it refreshing. I love the Strymons, have loved them for years. But when I listen back, I realized just how much the effects really did kind of sit on my guitar. And if I wanted them to be really present, I had to sacrifice in my guitar's clarity or forwardness in a mix. And so that's a bit of a bummer. And so these are making me feel like I don't have to do that as much. Plus, I have something, even like a chroma console here from Hologram, such a cool pedal. But these are kind of scratching the itch for me, giving me that thing in literally a delay and a reverb. And I would not have expected that I would consider downsizing or simplifying from other modulation pedals, because these are giving me that alone. So for all of those who are like, Meris, give us a multi-modulation effects unit. They did, and they called it Mercury X and LVX, and you throw them together and you've got more than enough of that that you didn't realize you would want in a delay and reverb. So hats off to Meris. All the time that they spent, it wasn't for nothing. These sound incredible. I would say literally the only differentiating factor is it's not like a dual engine where it's like you can run 2 delays or 2 reverbs or something. But I gotta be honest, I don't feel like I'm missing that, especially in the reverb front. I feel like 2 reverbs going into it themselves would become a lot really fast. Unless you're doing it tastefully, it could totally sound awesome. I totally believe it. I might get the new Big Sky at some point. But to me, what's more meaningful is having an individual set of reverbs and a lot of options and a lot of creativity on deck where I can manipulate and control and have my way with all of these effects in a tasteful way. And man, small changes make big changes in feel that are awesome and I am really enjoying. So for songs, it's making it a more delightful and simple experience. I would highly encourage you try them. If you find yourself stumped and need a good starting point, check out my presets. If anything, hopefully they will just be a bit of a guide to reveal some little stepping stones that you can go off of and then just use some of those simple, like, compressor tricks and things like that to make your other effects, and so that they feel very present and forward and not lost or small sounding. Because that was the biggest thing I battled when I swapped over from the Timeline to the LVX. At first, my tone felt smaller, and I didn't realize how much my delay was aiding by coming around my guitar and making it feel bigger. So when I first did the LVX and realized I didn't have enough present forward volume from it, my tone felt a little unfamiliar and small that I was able to solve with some compression tricks. So anyways, before I keep rambling on, that's the Meris pedals. They rule. You should check them out. Yes, it's a viable option and they sound amazing. You heard it here. Thanks, Meris. These are awesome.